we're gonna talk about a loading protocol we're gonna use and why it might just be the best thing to ever happen to your fitness. So if you show up to the gym, especially a gym like ours, you're probably showing up for a couple of different reasons. One, you wanna get stronger. Two, you want to increase your performance, either in CrossFit or in like field sport performance. Or number three, you just want to be fucking jacked and sexy. All of these are dope goals, and all of these are going to be massively benefited by the cluster program we're going to be implementing. So if we look at the factors that influence your fitness and your being dope, we have strength, right? Your ability to move maximal level weights. We have power, your ability to exert large amounts of force in a small amount of time. And we have hypertrophy, which I wrote on the board as thick. Basically adding lean muscle mass, which will make you look more jacked, toned, peeled, bananaed, whatever fucking term you want to use, while also having you burn off fat, because we know that if you have lean muscle mass, you burn off more fat throughout your daily life. So how are we going to influence these? We're going to be using a loading protocol. Now, why does all of this matter, and how is this going to positively influence all of these categories at the same time, instead of having to spend phases or cycles or blocks of training focused on specific ones? This is basically going to lay the foundation of strength, power, and hypertrophy, for which we can then stack hella fucking gains on top of for months and even years to come. But why does it work? So if we look at these different things and how we're gonna influence them and how they play in together, strength. If we want to impact our maximal levels of ability to produce force, we need to look at the equation and like the science side of what is it scientifically or at a muscle physio level that allows us to produce enough force to lift a barbell. Well, we basically have an equation. Here we go. We have an equation of force versus force. Now on one side, we have the weight we're trying to lift. So the weight we're trying to lift would be its mass. Mass is measured often in kilograms, is a good way to measure mass. Pounds is actually not a measurement of mass, because pounds is relative to where you are in the world and the force of gravity. But we'll take mass for an example. And then we have the mass times acceleration. So let's say we're going to lift a 100 kilogram bar, which, because everyone that watches anything I put out is in the United States, that would be approximately 220 pounds. And then we have acceleration, which is the force of gravity, the local force of gravity. So we'll go 9.8 meters per second squared. That equals the force of the weight that you are trying to lift. Now, in order for you to be successful in lifting said weight, you need the force of your muscles to produce more than that of, we'll go greater than that of the barbell. So you need to be able to produce more force than what is being pulled down by the bar. And now the equation for force, as we just touched on, is mass by acceleration. So generally, when we are trying to get stronger, right, and we are trying to build maximal levels of strength, we focus on improving the mass piece to increase force, right? If either of these goes up, then that goes up. But we could also, theoretically, do it by improving the acceleration piece. So if we can increase acceleration and the rate at which we are driving the bar up or pulling the bar up, then we are going to be producing more force. We can produce relatively equal amounts of force if we take mass and acceleration into consideration at both near maximal levels of our 1 rep max. So if we look at like 90 to 100%, that's generally a strategy for improving our max force output. But if we are lowering those weights down to say 80 or 75 or even 70%, we can still drive near maximal levels of force as long as we have a huge focus and intent in the acceleration category. When we drop too far down and we start getting into 50, 40, 30% of 1 rep max, then we start to lose our ability to generate maximal levels of force. There tends to be like kind of a bell curve there, where I guess it's not a bell curve, where we see down here, this is 0% of 1 rep max, this is 100. We see a steady rise as we go up, and then it kind of tapers off towards the top. So as long as we're in that upper threshold, we can still influence maximal levels of force output, therefore influencing our maximal levels of strength. Number 2, we want to add muscle mass, which, FYI, also has a direct scientific correlation to strength. The more you have of muscle cross-sectional area, the stronger you're going to be. Fact. Hypertrophy training should always be a part of strength training because that is the most direct scientific correlation between how strong you are is your muscle cross-sectional area. I did a whole fucking video about that before, so we're not going to go into it today. If we look at what drives hypertrophy, we have the 3 pillars of hypertrophy, right? We have mechanical tension, MAC tension. We have metabolic duress, or metabolic stress. This is often considered 3, and we have muscle damage. But of these 3 pillars, we know that one of them is massively superior to the other 2 in its ability to create hypertrophy, and that is mechanical tension. In fact, we know that hypertrophy can exist in the absence of these 2, but there is not scientific, factual, locked-in studies that it can exist in the absence of mechanical tension. So we want to prioritize this when it comes to hypertrophy. So how do we calculate theoretically mechanical tension, and if we're putting enough tension into the muscles to generate the type of adaptations we're looking for, that being getting absolutely yodeled for the summer? We do that by load, weight of the barbell, times volume, sets and reps. The more load and volume across the session or across the week or across the month we put into tissue, the more likely that tissue is to stimulate growth. So if we look at a more traditional model of hypertrophy, we might see 4 sets by 10 reps at, we'll call it 70% of 1 RM. So I'll give you a second to calculate that weight out in your head, what that's gonna feel like. Those are pretty fucking taxing sets, right? That's gonna be challenging. We're gonna end up taking a full rest between those, call it a 3-minute rest, and that's really gonna take a lot out of us. But that's going to generate a bunch of hypertrophy. What if, though, we did 8 sets by 5 reps at 70% of 1 RM? Well, if we look, same total volume, right? We got 40 reps here, we've got 40 reps here, and we're doing it at the same load. So in theory, we're looking at getting the same total volume and the same thick score from both of these progressions. So keep that in mind, right? We're gonna be able to drive the same adaptation when it comes to hypertrophy by doing this and this. If we look at it at a pure biomechanics, physiological, scientific level, the math stacks up. Now, power, which is the GOAT daddy of all sports. If you look at your ability to perform in something like CrossFit or in field sports or in weightlifting, all of these are driven, not powerlifting, right? Which is funny because it's called powerlifting, but it doesn't, it's not super relevant in powerlifting. But in all true sports, this is the big separator. If we look at power, the equation for power is power equals work divided by time, right? How much work can you complete in a set amount of time? And so we just need to do things quickly. And so if we look at something like our lifting protocol that we mentioned before, think about this set of 4 by 10. Think about what your effort on that first rep looks like. Think about how aggressively you're moving it. Think about what the effort on that 10th rep looks like. That's starting to get slow. That barbell is not moving aggressively, it's moving slow. And do you know what moving slow trains you to do? I'll give you a guess. It trains you to be fucking slow. And in sport, we do not want to be slow. We want to be fast. So again, if we look at our example of this 4 by 10 versus this 8 by 5, at this 8 by 5, guess what? You're going to be able to move all 40 reps with an aggressive intensity. You're going to keep your rest period short, but you're still going to have the rest, which is going to keep power output high. So we evaluated, or we've proven so far that we're going to get the same level of thick, right? Because we have the same total volume by the same load. But now, instead of teaching ourselves to move slow, which makes us less powerful, we're going to teach ourselves to move fast, because we're going to maintain that aggressive acceleration and output across all reps. And because we're also going to be keeping that power output high, which means we're going to be keeping acceleration high, we're going to, although we're sacrificing some mass in a more traditional, like call it a more traditional strength building, we would see like a 3x5 at, call it 80 to 85% of 1 RM. Well, yeah, we're sacrificing some load here. We are not going to be moving as heavy a loads as we would be if we were doing a more traditional loading scheme for strength. But although the loads are lower, because we've set it up where we have high power output, we're going to keep acceleration high, and we're still going to be getting that high force component, which is going to help drive up maximal strength. I will caveat that this is probably not the single greatest strategy to drive up maximal strength, but we're still getting a really hefty dose of it while also maximizing power outputs and maximizing hypertrophy outputs, which will also have more carryover and help to supplement the maximal force production or strength outputs. But how do we make this even juicier? How do we take those lemons and we squeeze them up and we make them into the juiciest lemonade, like the Element packets of lemonade that just dropped? Well, we need to take into account what is the demand of our sport. And if it's field sport, it's generally not about a single bout of maximal output, right? You're going to have repeat bouts of maximal output, often without full recovery. You look at plays in football, you look at sprints and jumps in basketball, you look at all of these things. Or in CrossFit, CrossFit, it is not often your ability to hit a 1 rep max lift that is the separator. It's your ability to have high degrees of power output, to recover quickly, and then to have high degrees of power output again. What would we call that? We call that repeat max effort ability, called RMEA. We are directly training your ability to have peak levels of power and strength under limited recovery, and training your body and your physiology at a muscular level to do that again and again and again, and keep producing outputs with limited amounts of rest. We are also going to apply this to varying movement patterns. So the entire cycle will happen in 3-week phases, because it's going to be a long cycle. It's going to be 9 weeks, and things get stale after 9 weeks. So instead of running through it on repeat, for example, in our squat variation, we are going to use reverse banded front squats for the first 3 weeks, tipping through those 3 different loading schemes, 8x5, 10x4, 12x3. Then we are going to transition into reverse banded back squats, and then we are going to finish with traditional back squats through the final 3 weeks, looking to drive up all of the body's ability to do these things. Now, you may have heard there, I said reverse banded. So why are we using reverse banded? We are going to add an additional sprinkle on top to all of the gains that we're going to be making by using something called fast eccentrics. So fast eccentrics are kind of this new and to some degree unknown factor of training. And what does the eccentric do, and what implications does it have on our muscle physiology and on the adaptations it creates? Well, eccentrics have been studied quite a bit, and one thing that they know is that, for example, the eccentric creates more muscular damage because we can tolerate more load than the concentric portion of the movement. For those unfamiliar, concentric is when we are producing force, eccentric is when we are absorbing force. In a squat, this would be eccentric on the way down, concentric on the way up. We produce force on the mass or on the load or on the barbell during the concentric. On the eccentric, it produces force on us. And there is this kind of new concept that's being out there, and it is the concept of residual force enhancement. And so what they have shown is that when we do a fast eccentric, meaning we absorb that force very quickly, it lengthens the actin filament, which is the small filament within muscle tissue. When we lengthen that filament quickly under load, what it does is it stores a tremendous amount of energy. So we often talk about storing energy and elasticity of tissue, and elasticity is often contributed to tendon elasticity, but muscles are stupid elastic as well, and the actin filaments within muscles store a ton of energy. I'm tripping over my words. And so if we look at dropping quickly into the descent of things, what we're going to do is we're going to store that energy, which becomes potential energy that we are then capable of applying to the set afterwards. So what we will often see across a loading protocol like this is we will see power, the wattage of each set, actually climb slightly, because we start to see that buildup of energy that we can then apply to the load, which then is going to positively influence our power and our strength. And we use the reverse bands for two things. On the eccentric, if we drop very aggressively into a squat, or we drop aggressively into a bench press, for some degree of time, we are going to drop faster than the pull of gravity is going to pull that bar down. So what the band allows is it allows us to have a more consistent contraction where that load is actually creating work on us over the entire movement instead of it just catching us at the bottom. Number two, when we start to drive aggressively through the concentric, the pressing movement of the exercise, then we need to be able to provide constant tension against the weight. And as velocity changes, the amount of force that we are required to produce because we've overcome inertia actually regresses as well. The bands allow us to have to produce force towards the entire even top end of the movement. And normally, as we reach the top end of, call it a squat, you have what is some degree of inhibition where your body will intentionally slow your force output because it knows, whether you tell it to or not, that at the top of the squat, it doesn't want to come and actually shoot that bar off of your shoulders and then have it crash back down. So it will inhibit your ability to extend the hips and the knees towards the top. The band removes much of that inhibition. On top of that, if we look at using those fast eccentrics and their implication to a more specific area, like weightlifting, which if you're a weightlifter is obviously the whole fucking thing, but if you're a CrossFitter, that's massive as well. When we look at receiving a clean or a snatch or receiving a jerk, we are talking about our ability to receive load in an eccentric manner extremely quickly while controlling it. So learning to use those fast eccentrics and get into those positions while driving out of them quickly is going to have direct correlation to both your neurological ability to handle heavy weights in that fast eccentric manner, but also your muscle's physiology and its ability to absorb that load, amortize it, and reproduce it in the other direction. So all of this being said, this is going to make you an absolute jacked athlete, aka JACKEDlete, aka the title of our next cycle. We will have some options for people that like a little bit more variety and are a little bit more focused on getting a pump. But I would say if you have any athletic endeavor goals, you want to get better as an overall athlete, then this is going to be the best protocol for everyone. Show up, get ready to rip it up, and we excited for the games that lie ahead, baby! Come on now, let's get peeled.